Hi everyone, my name is Frank and welcome to my YouTube channel. This is a new piece of equipment for my shop. It's the Powermatic P1800B. It is a single phase 5 horsepower motor, 230 volt. It has an 18-inch depth of cut as well as an 18-inch height of cut. So this is a big piece of equipment for me in my shop, something I did some research on and looking at a very large type of bandsaw, and out of all the ones I've looked at, the Powermatic is the one that I felt was the best for me. So stay tuned to the video and I'll show you how I put it together, as well as going through the owner's manual instructions on fine-tuning and setting it up for the first time to cut. It was a beast. It's about 960 pounds with the crate and about 860 pounds without the crate. So it is heavy. I ended up putting it up onto a Shop Fox extra heavy duty mobile base. So stay tuned and we'll get at it. Unpacked the boxes that came with the bandsaw and kind of go over review. This is the parts pack that comes with it. It's in a plastic bag with all the nuts, washers, and the Allen head bolts. Here are the two eye-rings that they provide that screws into the top of the bandsaw so that you can put straps through the eye bolts and lift it up with a forklift if you have that type of shop capability. Of course, I didn't do that. My shop is a lot lower, so I ended up getting it off the skid a different way. It has a couple of other metal handles, another black plastic handle, and another kind of a star wheel handle, star wheel there. So those are the parts. That's about all that comes with it. You've got the rail, one of the rails. There's two of them. We've got some damage here that it's got a big nick in here and a scratch, which is just cosmetic. This is the Resaw piece of material, quite bulky and heavy. Here is the square, T-square. Good grief, I'm banging everything around here. A couple other rails that I can assume are for the fence system, and again a couple of nicks in the packing. I'm surprised they got nicked. I think they were nicked up before they got into the packaging. Then the extruded aluminum fence, and there's only one small area where there's a nick, and it's at the back end of the rail. I will have to smooth that out because if you use this fence on the side like they show you, it will interfere with your cutting. So it's got a little bit of a nub here. You can see. Again, when I looked at the packaging, it looks like that was nicked before it was packaged. And then you've got the fence that comes in the packaging. The fence looks good. Don't see any issues with it. And then, of course, the instruction book. One other thing I noticed, and I guess I'll have to read to see if you're supposed to take it off, but there's some tape here that if you peel it off, you're down to metal. I'm not sure if that's on purpose. But I guess we'll look into the owner's manual as we put this thing together and figure out what we're supposed to do, if we're supposed to take that tape off or not. And of course then here's the bandsaw itself. So I think probably what I'm going to end up doing first is I'm going to go ahead and remove the, where it says attention, remove the zip strip there, cut that off, get all this plastic off, the cardboard off along the side, some of the bubble wrap on the feet. And I'll start cleaning up this base because of course it's got the lovely Cosmoline all over it. So that's just going to be a fun thing to clean up. So I'll probably end up doing that first before I start putting everything assembled together per the instructions that came in the book. The only other little ding I see here is right here, just like a part of the tape or part of the thing got banged up. Not sure what that's from, but the way that this thing was packed was pretty terrible. almost like a balsa wood crate. Didn't really protect it a lot, but you know, we got it here in one piece. So let's go ahead and start getting the cosmoline and everything off this bandsaw first. Okay, I got all the cosmoline off the table. I use WD-40. I've used that in the past. It seems to work pretty good. You have to work it in a little bit to kind of penetrate and melt the cosmoline. But actually, the table looks beautiful. So I'm going to go ahead and wax it up, put a coat of wax on it to protect it and to keep it nice and smooth before I go any further. Okay, so our first step, now that I've got the bandsaw cleaned up with the Cosmoline, from the Cosmoline I should say, I'm going to start off here at 8.4 because everything else in the manual kind of covers stuff like setup and assembly, all the parts that you have. It goes over the base of the bandsaw. It also covers a million safety issues or safety topics. So the first thing of assembly here is at the rear rail, and it's saying to attach this rear rail with 3 screws. They're the M8 by 16 button screws, and then put lock washers onto those and put the rail on. So here's the rail, and it's got the 3 holes in it. I've got the 3 screws ready with lock washers already on them, and it will get attached here. Let me get it right side up. It will actually, nope, it's the other way around. I had it right. It'll get attached just like that. So it also says in the instructions, and that's why I typically read instructions in advance to kind of prepare myself. And it says that you keep the rail, it doesn't matter how far of a distance you have going down, but you need to have the rail centered, or I should say level, across the table. But then later on over in step 8.8, it talks about how the tail end of the fence will actually ride on that rail. So to me, it really does matter. I wish they would have given a dimension, but they didn't. It does matter how tall or deep you actually put that. Now, these screws are elongated a little bit, so they're a little bit larger than the holes, I should say, are larger than the screws. So there's just a little bit of play, okay? But I did measure just to see, okay, what is the distance here on this this knob that will actually ride on the rail, and it has probably a good inch throw to it on the inside. So this is what will adjust to ride onto the top of this rail. So it'll make sense once I get going on it, but I like reading ahead. Actually, I read all the instructions so that I know what's going on in advance as I do these steps to see exactly what it's being done or what's being used for in the future, and it helps me to do the installation. So let's go ahead and get started and get this rail attached. Okay, so the rail is now on nice and tight, and the dimension is the same across the entire rail, therefore it's level to the top of the table. So that is done. Now we got the front rail and guide. Install the front rail to the front edge of the table using the M8 by 20 button screws with the lock washers, and also the flat washers through the slotted holes in the rail, placing the screws approximately center of the slots. And it says this could be adjusted later as needed. Tighten the screws with a hex wrench. So it's talking about this rail going on to the front and tightening that up. Then we'll start putting the guide on, the guide rail onto that side rail, that front rail. So let's go ahead and get that started. Okay, so again, it's going to take 2 of these screws to mount this rail to the front of the table. And these are the 3/4 inch, not the 1/2 inch. The other 5 1/2 inch is what will bolt underneath this rail to put the guide, the fence guide on. Man, I can't talk today. Let's go ahead and put this on. Now they're saying, because these have slotted holes, they're saying to put these screws and just center it, because that way you can use adjustment later on. So when you mount this to the tabletop, just put the bolt in the center of those elongated holes. You must have some cosmoline in the holes, because man, they're tough to get in. Alright, so make sure I'm about centered. I am centered. I'll go ahead and tighten them up. Okay, that's now attached to the front of the table. Okay, so here's the guide rail, and here's the bolts, the holes it has in the bottom of the guide rail, and that's what the screws will come up through this guide rail bracket into the guide rail itself. Now they said just to hand tighten these in all 5 locations, and then it said to pull the rail back away from the table as far as you can, and then you can tighten the bolts. Again, these are elongated holes in this bracket that's bolting the rail to. So I'm going to center those bolts in those elongated holes. I'm kind of pulling on this rail while I'm tightening it. Right now I'm just doing a good finger tight with the long part of the Allen wrench, and then we'll do a little more torque tightening. All right, with the shorter end. Again, making sure I'm as far back as I can, and I am. Okay, that is now accomplished. You'll see, I said something earlier about I got a piece of tape on this Powermatic, and it looks like this was supposed to be removed at the factory, because this is where the actual fence rides on, and you clamp it down to hold it, and you don't want to be clamping it down onto paint. So I'm going to go ahead and peel this off, because I don't see any instructions anywhere. So someone must have forgot to do this at the factory. And now you can see it's got a nice metal edge to it, and that's where the shoe will actually tighten for the fence. Okay, let's go to the next step. Okay, the next part is the fence assembly itself, and it's basically saying to place the fence onto the table and keep it in the upward position to put it on, and then you bring it down to lock it. Now, I will tell you later on again, this adjustment screw that they have on the tail end that will ride on the rail on the back side of the table, it does have a locking nut on it, and to remove that or unlock that nut in order to raise or lower this at that next step, it will take a 10mm wrench. Okay, so if you have a 10mm wrench, you can untighten this and be able to set the level of the fence itself. So have a 10mm wrench handy. Well, the one thing I didn't say is we have to attach the knob. So let's go ahead and get the knob and we can attach it. Yeah, so in the instructions it shows that this piece is already attached to the fence, and it is not. It comes as a packet. It's wrapped up in plastic itself. So you will have to attach this, which is no big deal, but they just don't say that in the instructions. So we will attach it now. I'll tighten it. It's in the up position, which is unlocked, and that cam is now in the locked position. So, unlocked, locked. Next step. Okay, so now step number 8.7 is the Resaw fence. It's basically saying to loosen up the knobs on the back side of that fence, and you can slide the fence on. There's two different positions. You can have it upright for resawing, or you can lay it flat for smaller pieces, cutting smaller pieces. So let's go ahead and get that fence installed upright. So on the back side there's two silver knobs back here, and you can loosen those knobs up. Put this down. Easier to take it up and get it loosened up. There we go. Put it back down. Lock it back in place. Okay, you got to really loosen it because you really need to get this black bar away from the fence. Looking at the thickness of the extruded metal, it's about 1/8 of an inch. So you want to go at least 3/16 gap. There we go. In order to slide that fence on. And once you tighten it, it tightens up that black plastic rod to the fence. There you have it. Okay, you can kind of see it now. Here are those silver knobs that you loosen. You can see the track. Here's the gap that has to go on the back side of that black bar. That's a plastic black bar. And being it's a friction fit, you can loosen both of those knobs up, and you can take this fence and you can move it out or move it in, whichever way you want to. And again, I said earlier, I got a nick right in this fence here, so I'm going to have to take a file and kind of smooth that out, because if I would use it on the shorter distance, that's going to be a problem. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, next it says to check the fence to the table clearance, and it shows that the distance on that fence from the back and the front should be equal. It doesn't say what dimension it should be, but there's two different ways you can adjust it. When I take a look at mine, that fence looks pretty even across the board, but if it was crooked, there's two ways to set it. You can either adjust these set screws here. There's a plastic set screw here, and there's another one here. You can lower them both or raise them both, or you can go to the back, use that 10mm wrench, and adjust this little foot stop here. And that's how you can level out that fence. Okay, we're at step 8.9. It says setting the cursor to 0 position. So what we're going to end up doing is taking the fence, putting it at 0, and it's saying that the Resaw fence must be installed, so it has to be in the vertical, not the horizontal position. That the blade must be installed and fully tensioned, and then it tells you the rest to kind of move the blade over, or move the fence over to the blade. The blade comes with a protective cover that's just stapled. Thank you, Powermatic. That was a great idea, because as I've cleaned the Cosmoline off this, you know, I've hit this a few times and I didn't cut my hands, although yeah, I would have cut my hands, although I had my plastic rubber gloves on. That wouldn't have worked. So all I have to do is go up along the line here and remove this this piece of, it's almost like a cardboard, kind of like a thick piece of paper or cardboard. So let me put the camera down. I got to raise this up and get it on the rest of the way up, because you're going to have to set this fence up against this blade, and then we'll be zeroing out or truing it up to the blade. Okay, so the instructions say to slide the fence all the way and touch the blade. They said touch it, don't force it. If it just touches without bending it, lock it in place. They say if your mark here should be, let me zoom in here, should be at 0. And look at that. Mine's exactly at 0. If it's not, you can undo these set screws here and here, and you can move this glass, or I'm sorry, that's the glass. You don't want to move that. You want to unscrew these 2 screws, and then you can move this slide over to get that line right onto 0 when you're touching the blade. Okay, so you can see I'm touching the blade and I am at 0. That's dumb luck. Or remember, when I put this rail on, I did, those holes are elongated, I put the screws in the middle of the elongation. So I guess that is dumb luck. Okay, next step. In step 8.10, it talks about setting a table that's parallel to the blade. They're saying that this has actually been done by the manufacturer in the factory, and it goes through the steps that you can check to make sure that it is aligned appropriately. And I checked mine is aligned appropriately. Next, they say, is just setting up the fence parallel to the blade. So you remove the Resaw part of the fence, and you put this fence along your miter slot, and then you can check to see the distance, if it's exactly straight and parallel with the table. They say it is from the factory, but check it anyway. So they say you can remove this plastic bar, remove these the knobs, and then you can do it on this side of the fence, or you could do it on this other side. So what I did is I have a straight edge, which is basically a 6-inch pocket ruler from Craftsman. And what I did is I checked to make sure that I was absolutely flush with the back edge of the miter slot, and it goes all the way down, doesn't hit, and it is perfectly flush on the back side. When I come back around and I do the nose here, I hit. I'm not going down the whole way. See how I'm hitting? Just ever so slightly. So it's not perfectly square to it. In order to make an adjustment, you have a screw, a set screw, which is a plastic screw on this side. Actually, it's a metal screw, and a metal one on this side. You can make the adjustments. So what I want to do is I want to push my fence out that direction on the tail end. So that means I would want to push this set screw in, which would actually move that fence that direction ever so slightly. So that's what I'm going to do, is I'm going to put the camera down, I'll make that adjustment, check the back end of the fence, and make sure that it's parallel to the miter slot. So as it continues down to flush or parallel up this fence to the blade. Again, here are those set screws to move the fence in and out to parallel to the miter slot. But then you also have set screws A, which they're showing. Put the Resaw fence back on, and again bring it to 0 if you've already zeroed it out so it touches the blade, and then you check the blade to make sure that this distance on the bottom of the blade to the fence and the top of the blade to the fence is the same. Mine is not. To make an adjustment, you use those screws to bring them up or down to make this fence, this Resaw blade, fence parallel to the blade. So hopefully I can show you on mine. Zoom in. Zoom in is going to be fuzzy. So here I'm touching and I don't see any movement whatsoever. Down here, look at the movement. I got a good 3/32 of an inch. So I need to make an adjustment with these set screws, and since the top of the blade is touching, the bottom is not, I need to move this fence in that direction. Okay, I need to tilt it like that. So there's two ways to go about that. I can either lower this set screw or I can raise this set screw. And when I take a look at my fence, both those set screws have a lot of distance to them. So what I'm going to probably end up doing is I'll raise this set screw and I'll straighten out this fence to that blade. Okay, I ended up raising this set screw a little bit, and I lowered this one a little bit, and I got it perfectly flat now from top to bottom. I will tell you the set screw here is not the same size inset as the one in the front. The one in the front is with the Allen wrench that they gave us. This one, there is no Allen wrench that comes with the Powermatic bandsaw, and it's one thing I don't have is a set of metric Allen wrenches, but I do have my handy Festool multi-tool here, and it is the largest of the three sizes, and since I am an Imperial guy, I think it's a 6,0 is the size that I used. Eric, you will probably correct me on that. But yeah, that worked. That fits inside the hole just fine, and I made my adjustments. These are not that tight, the top ones or the ones in the front. So you're gonna probably have to just check your fence every so often to make sure that it's level and that it's square to the table and to the miter slot and to the blade. If I find that it loosened up over time for me, probably what I'll end up doing is pulling the back out, putting a little bit of plumber's tape on all four of those set screws, putting them back in, and therefore they'll have a little bit more of a tight friction and should hold the adjustment just fine. So let's go on the next step. All right, next section is 8.13, and it talks about the dust collection. And it shows where the bandsaw has two different dust ports to pull the sawdust from, the immediate place where you're cutting and then the bottom cavity of the bandsaw itself. So let's go down here, and you can see they've got one of the ports are right here and the other port is right down here at the bottom. That's your standard for a 4-inch port. So your flex hose will be able to fit over this with some work. Being that I've got the NordFab dust collection system throughout my shop, I'm going to get some machine adapters to attach to both of these dust ports, and then I can use the 4-inch band clamps with flexible hose that will attach to this bandsaw, so that way I can roll it out, not have it connected, the hose is connected, and then when I need to use it I can pull it out and connect the hose with the 4-inch band clamp. So that's what I'm going to end up doing, but I've got to order some of those adapters from Grizzly, which is where I've got my NordFab dust collection from. So we'll continue on to the next step, which is the electrical connections. So this machine is a single phase, 230 volt. It does draw 30 amp. They require a 30 amp circuit for it. The wiring, I'll go around the back side and show you the wiring on the box. I have wire that matches the wiring that goes from the control box to the motor. And so all of my plugs in my shop in the wall are 220, and I vary them. Every other plug's a different circuit. They're 30 amp that goes around the room. They're all wired 10 gauge. And so I have all the plugs are 30 amp, 250 volt. They're NEMA rated. This is the plug that I had to purchase in order to put onto the cord. This is a 3-wire, 2-pole 3-wire. So it'll have your 2 hots, 110 on each side, and then it'll have the ground. So let's go ahead and I'll kind of go over the wiring of the machine. Now, I am not going to tell you go wire it yourself. You should probably have a licensed electrician do the wiring for you. So as you can see, I took the cover off. They had some bubble wrap onto the outside of the cover to protect it. So just 4 screws in the 4 corners. I took those off. There's the cover plate. And here's the connection box. So it is actually running 12 gauge wire. So I matched the same type of wire, 12 AWG at 300 volt, which is what they've got coming from the control box going to the motor. And I carry some of that type of wire here that I've used for my machinery. And so this is the exact same wire and wire gauge that's running the motor. And this is what I'll end up putting on the inside of the box, and then connecting the male plug that I showed you earlier. This has got a cord. I use an extension cord, or part of an extension cord, so I'm going to cut this off and I'll reuse this. But they have a plug here at the bottom, so this is actually open, and they've got a connector to be able to connect the wire. So I'm just going to come up through that empty port into this box, do the wiring, and then close the box up, seal it up, and then I'll end up putting my plug on the other end. So let me go ahead and let me get that done, and we'll go on to the next step. Okay, so we're done with the wiring in the box. So you can see I've got my yellow cable coming up underneath. It's through that open port that they have, and you tighten it down, and so the cable can't come out. And then it's pretty simple, green to green, white to white, and black to black. We usually use some electrical tape we put around there just to keep those legs together. Okay, so I'll go ahead and put that back in, put the gasket back on, put the cover plate back on, and the electric will be done for this bandsaw. Okay, one of the things I'm going to do, it's not in the instructions, but I'm going to open up the top and the bottom covers. And one of the things I noticed when I did is you've got some of these gel packs in here for moisture, to absorb moisture, to keep it dry. So you definitely want to remove those two from the top. And then they also have the same 2 type of bags out on the bottom. So you might want to take those out before you do start up your bandsaw. Okay, next it gets into some of the squaring and leveling and changing blades. They're talking about in 10.2 the 90-degree table stop. So if you wanted to make the table tilt at a different angle, if you want to bring it back square to 90 degrees, this is your wheel that you would actually turn. This is your locking mechanism right here. It is one of those spring-loaded locks, so you can pull it out, lock it, tighten it again, pull it out, get it out of your way. So it's spring-loaded and spring-engaged. Here's an indicator showing it's at 0. And over here, if I can point out to it, let me try to go around the other side. This is where you can set your 90-degree stop. Right there. Okay. So it gives in the instructions how to adjust that, tighten it, screw it, move it, and that'll give you a perfect level every single time when you move your table to some other angle other than 90. If you want to bring it back to 90, that's what you do. To test and make sure that is square, you would take a square, and I've got my woodpecker square here, and put it out onto the table, put it up against the blade, and you would verify that it is level and plumb, and mine is to the blade. Okay. So that's the table tilting and leveling the table. It goes into installing and changing a blade. I'm not going to kind of cover that. It comes with a blade, but you would use the tensioning device here where it has a lever. I'm in the up position, which means I'm at full tension. I'm bringing it down, takes tension off, and this is how you can see the blade is really easy to move. You remove the pin, and you would take the blade off the machine. Okay. So I come up here. You can see by the indicator that my tension's way down. I have no tension on this blade whatsoever. Okay. There's a safety feature that they talk about as well, that when this lever is in the down position, partial tension, it has a switch that will not allow the machine to run in partial tension, so that you don't make a mistake and try to run the bandsaw when the blade is not fully engaged or fully tensioned. Okay, so I put it back up into the full tension position. It covers in the book as well the indication here of what is the tension for the right size blade. I have a 3/4 inch blade in the machine. The 3/4 inch blade came with it from Powermatic. Here is the wheel that you would turn, and the indicator will tell you if you're getting the right tension for the right blade. Okay, and it's a 3/4 inch blade, so I have 3/4 inch tension on it. Close the lid. It has a window that you can actually look inside. Right now I'm seeing the reflection of the camera, but there is the indicator you can see through the window. What else? I think that's pretty much it from the table leveling. I will also tell you, it's not in the instructions, but you have two of these handles that spin. Here has two flat sides to put a wrench on it. You screw this into the handle here. The second one that comes with the machine in the parts bag, you put on here, and you use the wrench to tighten it. And I believe that was a 14 millimeter wrench to tighten that up. I will also note, like most machinery, if they have some sort of measuring device that they want to protect, there's a protective coating, like a piece of plastic. We just take a fingernail, rub it off to the side, and peel it right off. I already did this on here. I had to bring the guard down all the way to the bottom to get this measurement up to about 1 inch, and then I was able to pull the rest of it off. Okay, so that pretty much covers the table stop, installing and changing blades, blade tensioning. I already talked about the tensioning device. If it's in partial tension, it won't run. And then it goes into blade tracking and blade centering. This comes pre-tracked and centered from the factory, and but if you are a little bit off, this is the knob. Here's the locking mechanism. You'd unlock this knob, and you would move it ever so slightly in order to look inside this window. You can maybe see it. There we go. You look inside this window, and you'll be able to track your blade to that yellow rubber. It's kind of like a rubber band onto that onto the wheel, and it tells you in the instructions how to center that blade. Take the center of your blade less the teeth, and that's where you want to be right in the center of your wheel. So it talks about blade tracking. Okay. Next, I'll get into some of the blade guide information. I'm not going to go over all of the setting of it because it's pretty basic for most bandsaws. I know there's some YouTube videos out there on fine-tuning your bandsaw. I think John Peters had put one out, and so there's some really good instructions here from Powermatic that goes specific to their machine, but it's pretty general for all bandsaws. So it goes into lower blade glides, the guidepost parallelism, and then it gets into the miter gauge, setting up the miter gauge and squaring that to the blade, which is pretty simple. And then it goes into the drive belt tensioning, so you can actually change the belt speed. There's two different speeds that this motor will run. It's a 5 horsepower motor, single phase, and you can actually change the speed by changing the belt on the inside. And to do that, you would loosen this locking mechanism down here, okay, and then you would use this lever to bring the motor down. That releases the tension. Then you can come around to the bottom side. Let me unlock it. And here you can see there is, try to zoom in with that, there we go, I got some focus. There is the serpentine belt. You can see the top wheel that's on. So it is at a faster speed. And I can't remember what the speed is, it's in the manual. And then you could take that tension off, bring this belt down to the lower pulley, and then that will actually be at a lower speed. Your belt is on the back side right back here. You could take that off and put this onto the top wheel. So there's two different wheels with the grooves for the serpentine belt, and two different wheels here for the different gears. Okay. And what else? Then it gets into doing the ripping and sawing, resawing instructions. It tells you a little bit about adjustments to the blade, any other kind of things you need to do. It goes over the lubricating points that you have to lubricate, make sure the gears are lubricated well and cleaned well. Then it gets into some instructions on blade selection, blade type, blade size for the type of wood, and then of course your troubleshooting. So overall, that's pretty much it. That is the Powermatic PM 1800B, single phase, 5 horsepower, 230 volt, bandsaw, 18-inch ripping capacity bandsaw. So it has 18 inches capacity from the blade in, as well as an 18-inch capacity in height of ripping. And that's really what I was looking for, is the maximum height that I could get in a machine that was fairly reasonable, although Powermatic equipment is expensive. Out of all the other bandsaws that I looked at that are of similar nature, 5 horsepower single phase with around a 16, 18, 20 inch cutting depth. I tell you what I really like, and what I read in reviews on the internet and talking to other woodworkers, professional woodworkers, the Powermatic I really do like. The bearings in that wheel, it is very smooth. It doesn't vibrate. I've already turned it on. I haven't done a cut yet. I'm going to be doing that here shortly. But overall, I like what I heard about it. It is one heavy machine. It is definitely an industrial piece of equipment, and this thing will last me beyond my lifetime as I borrow it here on Earth and then pass it on to whomever whenever I pass on. So anyway, that is it. So thanks for hanging in there on my video and going through it step by step. It may be boring to you, it may not help you at all, but maybe it will if you're looking to purchase either a Powermatic, an 18-inch bandsaw, or specifically this Powermatic 18-inch bandsaw. Boy, I tell you, I love it. This thing is built like a tank. It will not move. I like the mobile base that I put it on, and actually did a pretty good job. As I said in part of my Instagram feeds, the only complaint I have with Powermatic was the crate that it came in was really flimsy. The skid was terrible, broke already coming off the delivery truck. So of course that made it a challenge to get it into the shop. It took me, and my neighbor, about, from the time they dropped it off to getting it up my driveway and into the shop, it took about 2.5 hours. So it was a lot of ingenuity and using a lot of physics to try to get it into the shop, but we did. As a matter of fact, here is a picture of how we had to tilt it at 45 degrees to get it into the shop. So you can imagine what it took to do that. So I'm overall pleased. I've made a couple of cuts. It cuts really good. I do have a new blade for it, a carbide tip blade that I'll change out later on down the road. The only other thing I'm waiting for right now is the dust collection connectors to hook this up to my dust collection system. That's pretty much it. And I can get the hoses put on and start cutting away. I do have some boards that I do need to cut down to do some book matching for a client. So anyway, anything else on this? The only other thing I would suggest is going through and tightening down all the other Allen nuts and Allen bolts that are on here. Some of them are slightly loose from the factory. I typically do that on any new piece of machinery. You don't want it to start vibrating and have a bolt come off, and then you have a serious problem. So I went through the entire machine and made sure that everything was all tightened up and greased up, as it says in the maintenance section of the owner's manual. So I think we're doing pretty good. So thanks again, everyone, for watching the video. I hope you enjoyed it. If you liked it, please hit the thumbs up. Please share and subscribe to the video as I continue to make new videos going forward. Thanks a lot.